I trusted my stepdaughter with our wedding logistics until a found planner exposed the truth. Blending a family is a delicate architecture where every boundary must be placed with absolute care. At 38, I thought I had found the perfect balance when I became engaged to Thomas, a wonderful man with a 19-year-old daughter, Chloe. When we decided to host an intimate, small-scale wedding in our shared backyard garden, Chloe enthusiastically volunteered to coordinate the vendor arrivals and scheduling logistics with Thomas. Her eagerness felt like a beautiful bridge between us, and I gladly stepped back to give her a sense of ownership in our new beginning. But as weeks turned into months, critical deadlines for the catering, tents, and permits kept mysteriously slipping through our fingers. It wasn't until I opened our shared household planning log to cross-reference a caterer's deposit that the meticulous notes inside exposed a deliberate narrative strategy, revealing the unexpected reason Chloe was systematically delaying our wedding date. The vision for our wedding was simple: a quiet, warm autumn evening in the backyard of the craftsman home Thomas and I had spent the last year restoring. As an interior architect, I could see the layout perfectly. Bistro lights strung between the old oak trees, a modest wooden altar near the hydrangeas, and 40 of our closest family members and friends sharing a meal under the stars. Because Thomas's daughter Chloe was 19 and navigating the transition of her father remarrying, I wanted to ensure she felt entirely included in every step of the process. I didn't want to impose my professional coordinating background on her. I wanted her to feel like an equal partner in the household. "Evelyn, you have so much on your plate with your firm's new commercial project," Chloe had said during a Friday morning breakfast, her bright smile radiating warmth as she pushed her laptop across the kitchen island. "Let me and Dad handle the backyard log. I can manage the vendor outreach, the local zoning permits for the tents, and the seating chart drafts. It'll give me great experience for my communications major," Thomas beamed, reaching over to squeeze his daughter's hand. "That's incredibly generous of you, Chloe." "Evelyn, what do you think? It would take a huge weight off your weekends." "I think that sounds wonderful, Chloe," I replied, feeling a genuine wave of relief. "The entire master binder is on the digital household log. Just make sure we lock in the tent rental and the catering deposit by the end of the month, as the autumn season fills up incredibly fast." "Consider it done," Chloe promised, her fingers already flying across the keyboard as she created a new tab labeled Backyard Logistics. For the first few weeks, Chloe's enthusiasm was unmatched. Every evening, she would update us on her progress during dinner. I spoke with the rental company about the specific dimensions for the lawn staging, or "I'm tracking down the municipal guidelines for evening sound levels." Thomas was incredibly proud, constantly praising her maturity and organization to our neighbors. But as the summer began to transition into the crisp air of early autumn, the actual progress on the wedding began to stall in a series of highly specific, logical delays. "The catering company had a sudden internal restructuring, Evelyn," Chloe explained during a Sunday afternoon review, looking genuinely apologetic as she flipped through her notes. "The manager told me they can't lock in our menu pricing until the second week of next month. If we pay the deposit now, we might get locked into a much higher rate." "A month is a long time to wait for a contract, Chloe," I noted, a slight flicker of professional unease kicking in. "Did they say why?" "It's just standard corporate policy updates," she replied smoothly, her tone carrying a reassuring authority. "I'm tracking it daily. It's much safer to wait so we don't blow our budget." A week later, a similar issue arose with the municipal tent permits. Chloe informed Thomas that the town clerk's office was facing a severe backlog due to summer festival applications, meaning our backyard clearance wouldn't be reviewed until late September, just 3 weeks before our scheduled date. Every single delay was presented with a mountain of rational details, structured as a protective measure to keep our event from running into logistical errors. Yet, I couldn't shake the persistent feeling that the ground was slowly shifting beneath our feet. I assumed she was simply dealing with the routine frustrations of event planning, until an administrative discrepancy forced me to open the physical household log on a Tuesday evening. Thomas was away at a regional school board meeting, and I was sitting in our home office trying to finalize the budget columns for our household accounts. The local bakery had called my office line earlier that afternoon, mentioning they hadn't received the final headcount confirmation required to hold our cake reservation. Since Chloe was managing the master vendor list, I walked over to the built-in bookshelf and pulled down the leather-bound household log, the physical binder where we kept printed receipts, permit drafts, and handwritten calendar milestones alongside the digital files. I flipped to the backyard logistics section, expecting to find the baker's email address. Instead, my eyes caught a series of loose, handwritten notebook pages tucked into the back pocket of the divider. The pages were covered in Chloe's precise, neat handwriting, but they weren't vendor contact lists. They were a series of carefully mapped-out timelines, tracking her father's school district calendar against our wedding dates. "If catering contract is delayed until Sept 15, one note read, with a neat line drawn through the original August deadline, Baker will automatically release the weekend hold due to their 60-day policy. Forces a minimum 3-week shift to find an alternative vendor." I froze, the paper suddenly feeling incredibly heavy in my hands. I turned the page, my heart racing as I read the notes written in the margin under a heading titled Narrative Strategy. "Dad's vice principal performance review is scheduled for October 12th. If the municipal tent permit is submitted late, aim for Sept 20, the delayed approval window will clash directly with his review week. Dad will automatically request a postponement of the ceremony to avoid the dual stress. Keeps the household status quo intact through the winter semester. A profound hollow chill washed over me. The catering delays, the permit backlogs, the constant warnings about budget inflation, none of them were real. They were part of a highly calculated, meticulously orchestrated strategy designed to systematically collapse our wedding timeline from the inside out, without ever making Chloe look like the person responsible. She wasn't trying to help us organize our backyard venue, she was using her position as the coordinator to completely stall our marriage. I leaned back in the desk chair, staring at the handwritten margins. For a year, Chloe had been perfectly pleasant, welcoming, and supportive of our relationship. She had never thrown a tantrum, never expressed overt dislike toward me, and never argued about the changes in the house. But beneath that flawless, cooperative exterior lay a deep buried resentment and an intense anxiety about losing her father's undivided attention. She didn't want to attack me directly, because that would alienate her father. Instead, she had chosen a sophisticated administrative strategy that allowed the logistical circumstances to play the villain. "Evelyn, are you still working?" The front door clicked open, and Chloe's voice echoed down the hallway, light and cheerful as she returned from her evening study group at the campus library. I carefully closed the binder, my professional composure wrestling with a complex wave of domestic betrayal as her footsteps approached the office door. "Hi, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, a habit from years of managing high-stakes client negotiations. I placed the leather binder flat on the desk in front of me, my hand resting gently on the cover. Chloe stepped into the office, dropping her backpack onto the armchair. She noticed the binder immediately, her gaze dropping to my hand, and for a split second, the polished composure on her face cracked, her eyes flitting toward the pocket where the loose notes were stored. "I was just looking for the bakery contract," I said softly, looking up to meet her eyes. "But I found your timeline drafts instead, Chloe. The ones detailing how to force a minimum 3-week shift by delaying the catering contract." The room went completely silent, the only sound being the hum of the desk lamp between us. Chloe stood perfectly still, her hands clenching into the straps of her backpack. The cheerful, helpful university student seemed to vanish, replaced by a defensive, tightly wound young woman who realized her entire operation had been exposed. "You shouldn't have been looking through my personal notes, Evelyn," she said, her voice dropping into a sharp, icy register that I had never heard from her before. "Those are just creative logistics drafts. I was trying to map out worst-case scenarios for Dad." "These aren't worst-case scenarios, Chloe," I replied, pulling the handwritten pages out and placing them under the lamp. "You explicitly wrote the words narrative strategy. You deliberately delayed the municipal permit submission to ensure it would clash with your father's performance review, knowing he would feel forced to postpone the date." Chloe's jaw tightened, a flush of crimson creeping up her neck. Realizing that denial was completely useless against the physical evidence, she took a sharp step forward, her defenses shifting from deflection to a quiet, intense anger. "And what if I did?" she whispered, her eyes flashing with a raw, unshielded vulnerability. "You come into this house with your design firm, your perfect floor plans, and your event coordination, and you think you can just seamlessly rewrite our entire lives. My dad has spent the last 5 years completely devoted to my future. Now suddenly, our entire home is being turned into a backyard venue for your perfect social circle." "This isn't about my social circle, Chloe," I said gently, refusing to match her sharp tone. "This is about your father and me building a life together. If you were feeling overwhelmed or pushed aside, why didn't you just say that? Why choose a hidden strategy to sabotage the wedding?" "Because in this family, we don't do drama, Evelyn," Chloe spat out, a bitter smile touching her lips. "If I had thrown a fit, Dad would have felt guilty, and you would have viewed me as the difficult stepdaughter who needs to be handled. But if the city clerks and the catering managers are the ones causing the delays, then I'm just the helpful daughter trying to save the day, and the wedding gets pushed back naturally without anyone blaming me." The psychological clarity of her admission was stunning. She had weaponized efficiency to protect her emotional territory. "Does your father know how much you're hurting about this transition?" I asked, the anger in my chest completely dissolving into a profound, quiet empathy. "He thinks everything is perfect," she said, her voice cracking as a tear finally broke through her defensive stare. "Because I make sure it looks perfect. But once that altar is built in the backyard, everything changes permanently." I just needed more time to breathe. Before I could respond, the sound of the garage door opening signaled that Thomas had returned home early from his meeting, bringing our confrontation to a sudden, critical precipice. Chloe's face filled with a sudden, sharp panic. She looked at the papers on the desk, then toward the hallway, realizing that if Thomas walked into the office right now, the entire public misrepresentation she had maintained would be completely shattered, forcing a massive emotional crisis between her and her father. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling, her hands reaching out toward the desk. "Don't tell him like this, Evelyn. Please." I looked at her, this young woman who was so terrified of vulnerability that she had turned a family milestone into a chess match. If I used this moment to expose her to Thomas, I might win the argument and secure our wedding date, but I would permanently destroy any chance of ever building a real, trusting relationship with my stepdaughter. It would turn our household into a permanent battlefield of buried resentment. I quietly gathered the handwritten pages, slid them back into the leather binder, and closed it just as Thomas walked through the door, loosening his tie and carrying a folder of school reports. "Hey, you two!" Thomas smiled, looking between us, entirely unaware of the high-stakes tension filling the room. "What's the late-night committee meeting about? Working on the seating arrangements?" I looked at Chloe, whose breath was completely hitched in her throat, her eyes fixed on me with a mixture of terror and desperate pleading. "We were actually reviewing the municipal tent permit, Thomas," I said smoothly, offering a calm, reassuring smile to my fiancé. "Chloe brought up some incredibly valid points about your upcoming vice principal performance review in October. We realized that trying to coordinate the final inspections during your heaviest work week would put a massive, unfair strain on you." Thomas paused, looking at me, then at his daughter. "You know, I hadn't even thought about that. That week is always an absolute nightmare with the district audits. Chloe's been doing a lot of deep scheduling logistics," I continued, keeping the boundary firm but supportive. "And we've decided that instead of rushing the caterers and forcing a stressful timeline, we are going to officially move the wedding date back by 4 weeks into mid-November. It will give the yard time to transition into the deep autumn colors, and it completely clears your school schedule." Thomas let out a long, audible sigh of genuine relief, his entire posture relaxing. Wow, girls, thank you. I didn't want to admit it, but I was quietly losing sleep over how I was going to manage both. "Chloe, sweetheart, you are an absolute lifesaver for catching that." Chloe looked at her father, her expression a complex mix of intense relief and a deep, quiet realization of what I had just done for her. She had spent months trying to manipulate the timeline in secret, only for me to hand her the extra time she needed openly, as a gift of protection for her father. "Of course, Dad," Chloe murmured, her voice soft and genuinely emotional. I want it to be right for everyone." "You two are amazing," Thomas said, kissing the top of Chloe's head before heading toward the kitchen. "I'm going to grab a glass of water. Let me know if you need help locking up the office." As his footsteps faded down the hall, Chloe turned back to me, the silence between us holding a completely different quality than it had 10 minutes ago. Chloe stood by the armchair, her hands no longer clenched, her shoulders dropping as she looked at the leather household binder. "Why did you do that?" she asked in a quiet whisper. "You had the perfect opportunity to show him exactly what I was doing. He would have been so disappointed in me." "Because I don't want to build a marriage on your humiliation, Chloe," I said, standing up from the desk and walking over to her. "And I don't want your father to choose between his fiancé and his daughter. You wanted more time to adjust to this family transition, but instead of asking for it, you tried to engineer it through a series of administrative obstacles. That's an exhausting way to live." I reached out, placing my hand gently on the binder. "We have moved the date by 4 weeks. That is a firm, realistic boundary. But from this moment on, the logistics drafts are done. If you feel overwhelmed, or if you feel like I'm stepping on your toes, you talk to me directly at this desk. No hidden motives, no narrative strategies. We handle our home with transparency." Chloe looked down at the floor, a few quiet tears sliding down her cheeks. The sophisticated communications major was gone, leaving just a 19-year-old girl who was learning how to navigate change without fear. "Okay," she whispered, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. "Okay. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I was so afraid that everything would change and I wouldn't have a place here anymore." "Your place here is permanent, Chloe," I said, offering a small warm smile. "Now let's go join your father in the kitchen. Tomorrow morning, you and I are going to sit down and actually submit that municipal permit together." Our wedding took place on a crisp, stunning afternoon in mid-November. The bistro lights cast a golden glow over the multi-tiered backyard garden, and the native oaks were a brilliant shade of deep rust. The timeline was seamless, the catering was perfect, and Thomas was completely relaxed, having passed his administrative review with flying colors the month before. But the most beautiful part of the evening wasn't the layout or the design. It was the moment before the ceremony, when Chloe walked into our dressing room, holding the master household log under her arm. She didn't bring any secret timelines or hidden margins. Instead, she handed me a small, beautifully embroidered linen handkerchief she had stitched herself, featuring a pattern of hydrangeas and the date of our new, shared beginning. We didn't pretend the past year hadn't happened, and we didn't wipe away the complexity of blending our lives. But by addressing her anxieties with firm boundaries and quiet empathy rather than a public confrontation, we managed to build a foundation that was strong enough to survive the transition, proving that the best domestic structures are the ones built on absolute truth,